Good morning, everybody, and welcome back to the channel. We're going to be all over the place today. Lots to cover, as always, so I'm glad you guys are here. If you're new to the channel, understand that this channel is not right or left leaning. That through the course of pretty much a decade of research, looking at all the different conflicts and everything that's gone on over the last 10 years, we've discovered that there really is no major difference between the right and the left. That this is a construct created by the elite, by the controllers, or whatever you want to call them, that keep us all divided on our level. And then when it gets to the top in the level of control, they are able to exploit that and cause us all to be under their control. And that's how the right-left paradigm works. I want to make that clear because we're going to get into some topics today. We're going to get into Russia a bit. We're going to get into some of these other things. And so this is where we're going to be with the show today. So let's go into the chat for a minute. And wow, what a last couple of days that we've experienced here. How are you guys doing this morning? Good morning. There's Tom. Oh, someone says the sound sounds different. Yeah, I'm in a different location today, so that could be part of it. But anyway, as long as the sound is good and clear and okay, we'll continue on with the show today. Good morning, Troy, redeemed by Yah, Sanja, El's my Yeshua. Wonderful. All right, we get a lot of new people on the channel and, periodically. And so it's good to explain that to people about the right-left paradigm, because otherwise, people can get triggered. They could automatically assume something, right or left, and all that does is turn their ears off to the information that we're trying to share. Let's get into this first story here, and this is what happens when presidents seat Supreme Court justices. Now, I never liked this precedent of presidents seating these Supreme Court justices, because when cases like this come up that implicate these very presidents, they can decide to reject the case. And this is exactly what happened with Supreme Court and a victim that came forward in the egg stain case. And the Supreme Court rejected the case. Now, this is huge. And they tried to slip this one in under the radar. They didn't want people to know that this happened. But the reason why they rejected the case is because this thing went all the way to the top. And it could literally undermine the fabric of our government if people knew the truth about what really happened in this case and what it was really all about. Now, what makes this interesting and different about them rejecting the case that this victim wanted to be heard was that it was Bo Jiven who urged the Supreme Court not to hear this woman's case. What's that about? I mean, did you guys hear about this? This is my first time hearing about this when I pulled up this story. Why would Bo Jiven not want the Supreme Court to hear this case? Let's get into this article, because the victim explained that she and others were not properly notified of Egg Stain's plea deal, and therefore she's not bound to the settlement. Right? I mean, that makes sense to me. I agree with this 100%. How do you make a deal with victims when you don't know that you've notified all the victims and they haven't all agreed on it? This guy had probably hundreds of victims. So the question becomes, why would the Supreme Court not hear this case? Well, I think we figured out the answer here, but let's read this part of this story here. The Supreme Court is leaving in place a decision, throwing out a lawsuit filed by a woman who accused Egg Stain of doing things to her when she was a child. Courtney Wild's lawsuit claimed Florida federal prosecutors failed to consult victims more than a decade ago when reaching a secret plea deal with the Stain. The court said Tuesday would not consider the case. As is typical, the court did not comment in turning away the case, which was included on a list of cases the court said it would not take. Here's the spooky aspect to this. The Bo Jiven administration had urged the justices not to hear the case. If you had any doubts that this went all the way up to the top, hopefully this will help you understand what's really going on here. Why would a sitting president say that on a case that he doesn't even mention ever? So, crazy. Now, let's keep reading here. Wild's lawsuit revolved around a secret plea negotiation with The Stain that spared him serious federal charges and permitted him to plead guilty to lesser state those related charges. He did 13 months in jail, which we know he really didn't. The lawsuit claimed the deal was never discussed with any of his victims, in violation of the Crime Victims' Rights Act. So, this should be a slam dunk that they should reopen this case, but they won't. So, there's the truth about what's really going on. Now, this next story is truly alarming. I never ever trusted these tests. They could literally contain anything. Poison centers in U.S., Ohio sound alarm on chemical in some VidCo-19 at-home tests. So it appears as though there are things in these tests that can harm people. Now, to date, I have not personally used one of these tests. Granted, my life is somewhat insulated from choices I've made to begin to separate myself from the society because I knew stuff like this was coming. The more you can separate yourself from society, the better. Now, this isn't a judgment on those who are cornered into compliance or have to take these tests, obviously, because most people are in that boat. You're required to take tests at some point. But look what they found in some of these tests. Now, before we read this, here's the problem. A test is the last place anybody would suspect as the source of how they got sick, right? So the fact that they even made this connection and discovered that something was going on was pure luck. In other words, how many more of these tests are floating around out there that have made people sick? Let's read this. Be aware, the VidCo test in your home could contain a toxic substance that may be harmful to your children and you. The substance is sodium azide, and Cincinnati Children's Hospital Medical Centers has seen a surge in calls about exposures to the chemical since more people started self-testing at home. 50 million U.S. households have received some version of the test kits, although it's not clear how many contain sodium azide. The government has sent out 200 million of the kits, with about 85% of initial orders filled. So, what is going on with this? Well, they said we started getting our first exposures to these test kits in November, said the toxicologist. It was really all ages. The calls to the local center mirror what's been happening nationally. What is sodium azide? Well, it's used as a preservative, a liquid reagent in several of the test kits. Ingesting it can cause low blood pressure, which can result in dizziness, headaches, or palpitations. Exposure to it can also cause skin, eye, or nostril irritation. Cincinnati Children's Base Drug and Poison Information Center has logged 38 cases of exposure, with cases peaking in January. You guys, this is in one area. 38 cases. Imagine, multiply that times 50 states. Let's keep reading. Adults exposed generally have experienced mild skin irritation, which can get worse if the area isn't washed thoroughly. Nationwide, Children's Center Ohio Poison Center in Columbus also reported seeing an uptick in cases. the center did not immediately have a number of cases. Of course not. Well, they want to micromanage and count every single VidCo case, but they can't tell you when they've made a mistake and how widespread it is. Now, this stuff burns me up because here are these people that want us to put complete trust in them, right? And ordering us to do things based on that complete trust. And it appears as though these people are not very smart. I mean, of course, a child is going to get into a test kit and play doctor with their brothers and sisters because that's what children do. Drinking the potion. I mean, I can only imagine the truth behind what happened to some of these children after drinking this stuff. There were no controls. There's no warnings on the box to keep out of the reach of children. And why is it that we, you and I, the people that they control, why is it that we get micromanaged when we want to sell lemonade at a lemonade stand, or we want to make tacos and sell them out of the back of our trunk of our car, but these testing companies can literally put poison on the shelves and in through the mail with little oversight? Mostly I've been worried about our young children, this person said. Good news is the cases reported to Cincinnati have been minor and resolved at home. Oh, okay. Large amounts of exposure to sodium azide can cause severe health threats, leading to convulsions, loss of consciousness, lung injury. Now, you would think that, instead of trying to look tough on Russia, our president would come out, since all these tests went out, and make a statement about this and say, look out for this kind of stuff, because what if someone doesn't know? What if their child goes into convulsions and they think that they have epilepsy or something, and they have no idea that this test kit that they got, now I don't know if the ones that came from the president have this substance in them. I just got to give fair balance here. But if they did, there should be a statement made, because all these test kits are floating around out there, and it appears as though many have things that can make people sick, and people need to know about this, not reading it on some headline or hearing it on my show. The chemical is best known as one found in airbags. That's interesting. Could lead to loss of consciousness, lung injury, respiratory failure, leading to death. This almost sounds, or the possibility could be intentional. Respiratory failure, lung injury. Several poison centers across the U.S. have reported sodium azide exposure from the test kits. What if you get a bad rash on your hand? You got some of this stuff on your hand. You don't know what it is. You're freaking out. Then you got some kind of weird disease. And the last thing in your mind would be to say, oh, I got that from the test kit. But here they're saying that that's probably maybe where you got it from. 200 plus reported cases from 55 poison centers. And those are only the people that knew to report it. Remember, reporting of things is very rare because, first of all, most people aren't going to report something if they think they can just get over it, right? They're not going to call up the people, they're not going to call somebody up and go, hey, I've got a rash on my hand, because they don't know to look for it, right? And then furthermore, are they really going to make the connection between the test kit and whatever happened to them? Most people do not make the connection. Why? Because they have not been told to make the connection or to look out for it. So now all of a sudden they got rules on what to do with these test kits. Store the kits in a high cabinet. Where was that message before? Preferably locked and out of the sight of children. For adults, read the directions carefully before using the test kits. When you're done testing, immediately wrap the contents of the kit and dispose of them out from your home. Check the children's backpacks for kits. Children are, what if they wanted to do something for mommy and daddy? Mommy, I tested myself because I was afraid that I was going to get you sick. I could totally see a child doing that because of all the fear being pushed on this, and the daily masks, and the psychological impact on these children. A child trying to do the right thing and then getting sick or poisoned because they were trying to do something because they feel so helpless about what is going on all around them. So be on the lookout for this. Have any of you who have had to use one of these kits had any issues with them? That is the question. That's what we're here to do, is share information so that we can protect ourselves, because these people aren't going to protect us. So share your stories in the chat. If you've had any of these kinds of symptoms after a test, or know of a child who's gotten very ill, maybe you can help that family by telling them this possibly could have been what happened to them. Okay. Well, let me check in the chat here and make sure you guys are with me. We'll move on to some of these other stories. Appreciate everybody showing up today. Now we've got more stars falling and hitting their heads. Now this is a creepy phenomenon. Another example of this bizarre phenomenon overtaking celebrity circles. And I'm starting to wonder, is this some kind of judgment? Let's read this one. This is Miss Alabama. Now, there's been a trend here that many of these people falling are people of color. What could that mean? I don't know. I guess Wendy Williams is on an extended leave of absence. They got a replacement for her. And there's all this bizarre, stuff happening surrounding her. Some pre-recorded video where she said she was 56 and she's really 57. And then she had fallen out on stage. So there's something weird going on with her. Something really weird. Now, here's the update on this new falling star. And now the first thing I noticed was when she died, she became part of the 27 Club, didn't she? If you don't know about the 27 Club, I think there's actually a Wikipedia page on the 27 Club. It's basically this phenomenon in which people at the age of 27, celebrities, keep dying. And there's a very, very long list of them as well. So let's read about what happened to Zoe Sozo Bethel. Days after sustaining severe injuries in an accident, the former model and Right Side Broadcasting Network reporter, who was crowned Miss Alabama for America Strong in 2021, died on February 18th. After succumbing to her injuries, her family confirmed on Instagram she was 27. While few details about the accident have been made public, she was living and working in Miami at the time of her death. Following the incident, the family took to social media asking them to pray for her. Now, they don't say exactly what happened. They just say it was severe. It was damage to her brain and brainstem, and she was in a coma. Did she fall? Something's going on with this phenomenon. There's no way all these people are falling and hitting their heads. Up to this point, I can't remember a celebrity who fell and hit their heads. Like, I couldn't even recount to you before this year this phenomenon of someone falling and hitting their heads. It just really never happened. But look at this. As news of the death emerged, many friends and former colleagues took to social media to pay tribute to Zoe. What could this represent? Now, there's something else going on with this that is important that needs to be mentioned. She had a very deep faith in God and dedicated to her beliefs in protecting life. Now, I always wonder about this, okay, because people who have a deep faith in God, now I'm not judging this woman, I'm just a little puzzled about why you would enter a Miss America contest, which is basically saturated in ego and all of the thing God hates, okay? Making other people feel less than pretty because you've got all these, I don't think that's of God, but, everyone's on their path, okay? And maybe she did really love God, and God was waiting to help her realize this on some level in her life. So it's not a judgment, but you have to wonder if it's accurate as to what they're saying here. It's very heavy hearts. We announce the passing of our dear friend, reigning Miss Alabama for America Strong. She was a light in the world. Now, there's another article here, and I'm wondering if there's any additional information on her. But look at this. Beauty pageant winner and conservative activist died after accident. Here they go on to explain she was a conservative. But look at this. The Crown. right? You got falling crowns happening here. Tipped crowns. I wonder if there's any biblical aspects to this. Tomorrow we're going to be talking about copper, and they identified that copper is integral in regulating the smell of sulfur. Your ability to smell sulfur comes from copper. We're going to talk about the implications of that. But in doing that, we're going to examine the sulfur 8 molecule, which is known as the crown molecule. It is an antiprism in shape and looks just like a crown. So, are these biblical judgments that crowns are falling, that the egos in our society are starting to fall? Is this some kind of sign from heaven that God is coming and this is all almost over as he begins to pull down the crown from those in power and control and wealth and all the other things? Let's read a little bit more about this, and then we'll move on to the next story. On Friday, a deeply religious Christian beauty pageant winner, look, they made sure that they said that, right? They want you to know that she was deeply religious. Now, when do you ever hear someone being described as such? She was a conservative political commentator, died of head injuries. First, neither her family, the police specified what caused the injuries. Wow. So now they confirmed. I'm glad I pulled up this other story, because it says here that she fell from a 3rd-story window, which makes this even more specific to what we've been covering over the past several months about this phenomenon of people falling out of windows. That is just shocking. Just like Miss USA fell out of a window. Somebody needs to start a list so we can document this, because there is some kind of phenomenon happening here. She worked for Students for Life and connected to Project Veritas. Okay, so let's see what else here. See if there's any new information in this article. Staunch proponent of taking the life of the womb. Opponent, not proponent, sorry. So very conservative. They want you to know that. And falls out a window. Now, there's something interesting about the child in the womb, and we've talked about this in past videos in the body code series, that God knew you in the womb, didn't he? He knew you in the womb. The Bible tells us this. And when the child is born, the child is born into sin, aren't they? Because the Bible tells us that as well. It says we are all born into sin. So we are all sinners. It's part of the gospel that we are born into sin. And that's why we need Jesus, right? Now we'll get into the implications of that more tomorrow as we talk about copper and the role that copper plays as it opposes iron in the blood and in the body. Iron versus copper, the enmity between the two seeds, the wheat and the tares growing up together. I can't wait for tomorrow's show. But the point I wanted to make about this is that when you're born into this reality, you lose your crown, don't you? You crown, the head of the child crowns. That's what they call it. You slip through the crown and you're born into sin. Your crown is left behind. And so when do we get our crown back? Well, the Bible tells us when we get our crown back. We get it back after we are saved at the end of time, right? That's when we get our crowns back. So there's something deeply spiritual happening here with these people losing their crowns. Now, here's another fallen crown or fallen angel. The Italian ambassador to Australia also fell out of a window. Just a few days ago, Francesca Targioli, Italy's ambassador to Australia, dies after falling off a balcony. What the heck is going on here? Let's keep reading here. Poorly died from falling from a balcony in her her hometown, sorry. Italian media on Sunday reported that she was found dead outside of a house north of Rome. Her death is being investigated by local authorities. So, heartbreaking news at the passing of Ambassador Francesca Giorgioli. And what else? This is her there. Fell out of a balcony. Wonder what floor she fell out of. She was described as one of Italy's greatest gifts to Australia. The Italian embassy in Australia's website describes Miss Targioli as a senior diplomat who held the position of ambassador since 2019. Profound sorrow, blah, 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 blah. She allegedly lost her balance while leaning over her balcony. Wow. Well, something definitely going on here with that. We'll keep our eyes peeled on this. Now, these two stories you guys sent to me. And so thank you. You know, I don't sit on the internet and browse through and looking for people who fell down. That's not how this channel works. But you guys notice these things, send them in to me, and then I present them on the show. Let's get into some other aspects of today's show. Now, as hard as the media and government tries to portray that for all intensive purposes, the spam-demic is basically over and everything is going back to normal, this is what they're trying to portray in the media, there's still one very large elephant in the room. What's that? Well, that the normal that they're talking about only applies to those who bow down and get smack-cinated. And if you don't get the magic potion, you stay at home, you still don't get to go to some entertainment, you still don't get to get on a cruise ship, you still don't get to do all the things you want to do. So, we're not normal, are we? But they want you to believe that we are. Look at this. These 3 major cruise lines are set to lift mask mandates as VidCo cases drop, but only if you have your smack scene. And this is the case for all this stuff. And this is how they'll silently segue into the smack scene verification system. Now that they have a large majority of people on board, they'll just simply keep claiming that the current system has breaches in security. And with each improvement in technology to secure those breaches, our freedoms and privacy will continue to erode. And then it will all end in some kind of universal mark, likely, and then slowly a universal compliance. And so you're going to see lots and lots of these stories making it sound like everything went back to normal. But when you actually open up the story and start reading it, you'll see that it only is normal for people who got the smack scene. Now, this is dishonest journalism, isn't it? It's dishonest because what the headline should say is these major cruise lines are set to lift mandates for the smack-cinated. Right? That's what it should read. Now, let's get into some other aspects of the show today. Let's talk about energy independence. Now, here they are bragging about U.S. energy imports dropping precipitously down to very, very low levels in the history of energy consumption in this country. In other words, we're importing the least amount of fossil fuels in the last, what does this say? This is hard to read. Since the 1950s. Now, this exposes them, doesn't it? Because according to this chart, if we're importing far less of these fossil fuels and we're now independent, our gas prices should be like $1 a gallon, shouldn't they? Right? Why are we paying the highest prices historically on gasoline, for instance, if we're doing all this ourselves now? We're not having to import it. Somewhere we're getting price gouged, aren't we? Now, I know why, but they'll never admit it. The prices are intentionally high and intentionally allowing the prices to soar so they can force us into the electric kingdom grid of control. We even got Bo jiving saying, oh, because of what's happening in Russia, our prices are going to stay high. That's a cop-out. That's not true. We don't depend on Russia for any energy. What is he even talking about? Since the days of Jimmy Carter and the 1970s oil crisis, U.S. has relentlessly pursued the utopia of energy independence. Indeed, energy independence is a worthy pursuit that both decrapulubicans readily agree upon. After all, relying on other countries for oil, natural gas, or coal is an inherently risky proposition since it can lead to wars. You think? The notion that the country could become self-sufficient by producing enough energy to sustain the entirety of its population and industries was first floated by Nixon. Then was popularized by a bird in the hand in the bush when he decried the United States' addiction to oil, which is often imported from unstable parts of the world, before announcing plans to break this addiction by going to war with the country. Developing several alternatives, including a multi-billion-dollar subsidized ramp-up of biofuels. Unbelievable. Turns out the former president was prescient on some key predictions, which in hindsight appears quite remarkable when you consider that back then, the shale industry was barely on its feet. Revelation that the U.S. is currently producing more energy than it consumes suggests that America has finally achieved the seemingly elusive goal of producing enough fuel to avoid relying on the rest of the world. So let's drop the gas prices down to $1 a gallon then. These people expose themselves. If you look close enough, they expose themselves. Now, I know there's a lot of other factors to take into account. The supply chain issues with getting the fuel where it needs to go. The shortage of truckers. I get all that. But they're not doing anything to fix that either, are they? And to say that it has something to do with Russia is a big fat lie. Now, let's get into this. We start to wind down these stories today. Let's get into this one. Now, if you think this can't happen in America, don't hold your breath. You know, sometimes I wonder if these organized protests are part of some larger agenda. Don't you? I mean, these people are organizing these events through social media, aren't they? And if the government was so concerned about people, you know, who they say will be violent or will assemble illegally or some kind of threat to them, wouldn't they just freeze their social media communications, you know, kind of like they did with Thump? I mean, wouldn't that be the first thing you'd do so people wouldn't even know where to show up or where to go? Right? Or wouldn't be able to fundraise? Because, you know, why didn't this get shut down before if it was such a threat? I mean, isn't that what they did with the alleged VidCo-19 misinformation? Look how quickly the algorithms sprung into action. And everything was already in place. Everything that they needed to crush YouTube channels and Facebook groups and Twitter accounts. But yet, miraculously and mysteriously, they allow these people to organize these events. Right? Because if these people are so dangerous, why even let them assemble? It's almost like they want them to assemble, right? And now, you know, the truckers avoided, for the most part, the provocateurs that we've seen in the past. But what did they get out of the deal? Did we come out better or did we come out worse? I mean, I guess you could make the case that awareness has been raised about what's happening to people and our freedoms and all this and the economy. But what did we get out of the deal? Unprecedented frozen bank accounts on fundraising. It's never really happened before on this scale. We're talking tens of millions of dollars got frozen and taken. We have unprecedented emergency acts that happen in Canada as well. Now, all of these will become the future precedent for any more protests. This is what they'll do. They'll just simply defund it. Look, you need money to organize protests, especially in the case of the truckers. They needed fuel and food to continue on doing what they were doing. So when you cut off the money, you cut off the protest, don't you? And this can happen to anybody. Let me give you an example. After what happened at the crapper hole, let's say somebody went on GoFundMe and did another crapper hole event. I think that'd probably last about 30 seconds on their server before it got shut down. You'd have people raiding, homes, and anyone who sent the few amounts of dollars that ended up getting through. So we know it can happen and will happen and does happen, even in America. Let's read what's happening in Canada and how people's assets were frozen. Now, I don't think Bitcoin is the answer, but, at least people like to get the 2-for-1, don't they? So they're going to put this headline up so that everyone goes to Bitcoin so they can further fleece people. Let's read this. Canada has become one of the growing list of nations facing backlash from citizens over Vidco curbs. Protests began in late January in response to new laws. Okay, we already know all that. Let's fast forward to the juicy part. Okay. Blah, blah, blah. There's all the programming. In response to the states of emergency, Canadians have been reportedly withdrawing money from bank accounts in fear of assets being frozen. UK economic journalist James Melville posted graphs of bank outages from last week, reflecting the surge in banking activity. So basically, the banks are shutting down, preventing people from pulling out their assets. Bank runs are self-perpetuating as more people withdraw funds. The chances of bank defaults rise. You can't blame this on the people. The problem here is the government and them basically standing up, Trudeau standing up and saying, you will have no freedom. We will not listen to you. You get nothing. You don't get a voice. Now understand, he was already saying this before anyone had done anything. There was no unrest. They tried to manufacture unrest by saying they were blocking the roads. Oh, whoop-de-doo, blocking the roads and creating noise. That's the unrest. And so that gave Trudeau just enough ammunition to say, we need to end this. I mean, if trucks could fly, he would probably say, they're blocking the sun. They'll just make up whatever they want. So, the reason why people are pulling money out of the bank isn't because of this. It's because the government has drawn a line in the sand. And they've basically stated we can go after whatever we want. If you support these people or you help them, we can go after you. So, of course, people are going to pull their money out. I would do the same thing. I don't keep much money in my bank account anyway. I don't like it sitting there because at any moment somebody could come by and say, oh, we saw what you talk about online. We're freezing your assets. If you think it doesn't happen in America, I'm sure it does. It's just the people that it's happened to probably don't have a voice to talk about it. Head of James Melville's tweet, law enforcement had ordered all regulated financial firms to stop allowing transactions over 34 crypto wallets linked to funding the Freedom Convoy. To date, however, there has yet to be an attempt to freeze the transfer of assets from fiat to crypto. Doesn't mean it's not going to happen. So, a lot of these people are turning to crypto. I don't think that's the answer. I think that's another straw man. But this is what's happening. I think they're about to wrap up the whole crypto thing anyway. They've already, slung arrows into Bitcoin. It's dropped. I don't know if it's recovered at all. Musk dropped it. Didn't he drop it or something? I don't know. I don't follow this stuff too closely, but the overall view that I'm getting is that they're about to shut it down and overtake it and repurpose it for their needs, for a global currency. They've already learned everything they need to learn. They're going to make a little bit more money out of it with stories like this, pump it up for a bit, get their profits out of it, drop it again, and that'll be the end of that. Do you see how, if you're not at the top making policy, that you just become a pinball in a pinball machine for these people? It's very hard to plan any kind of long-term investments in these kinds of things because you have no idea what these people are going to do. They have all the power to pump these stories up. My son was into some investing. He's only 22, but he was into some investing, and did pretty well with this. But he relies on reading the news. Well, I guess if you know how to read the news, you could make money on this stuff. But this isn't my bag. So this story is going to pump up crypto for a little bit, right? Because everyone's going to think that everyone else is going to Bitcoin in Canada. So my guess is you'll see a bump, and then all the rich people come in and make their profits. They probably already bought. They probably bought low before all this went down. And then when the story hits, they catch the bump because they already knew the story was going to come. Insider trading, right? And then they sell it off as soon as they made 10% on it or whatever. That's how it works, you guys. And none of us can anticipate the bumps because we have no idea what these people are going to do and what they've planned on doing. So this is the deception out there. This is the deception. The Bible says that if you seek after riches, you will stab yourself all over the body with many pains. Why do you think it says that? Because we are not in control of this economic system. So to try to play the game, so to speak, the rich man's game, you're going to lose. It's just the way it works. Now, what else do we have here? Why that popped off of there. Let's put it back. Now, here's another Supreme Court fail. Now, we discussed in previous shows that the Supreme Court is a straw man, didn't we? And I said it was the last place that they'll give the look, the illusion that the Supreme Court is the last bastion of truth and fairness in America, right? And they'll say, oh, well, if it gets past this or that, then the Supreme Court will make it right. This is what we've been told and programmed to believe. People have so much faith in the judicial system that everything's going to balance out and be fair in the end when it hits the Supreme Court. Well, Supreme Court has just let the nurses down in a very big way, still giving up freedom for safety as the Supreme Court rejects Maine's case to not make these Pokemon stickers mandatory for nurses in Maine. So, here's my question. How is a nurse any different than the private citizens who the court said don't have to have a smack scene? It's scary that the Supreme Court would differentiate between the two, right? So, nurses have less rights than the private citizen? That's weird. And it just goes to show that when you work for or sign up for the government, and in this case, Medicare for nurses, right? They're basically dealing with Medicare, which is government. So, in this case, this is the excuse the Supreme Court gave that they have to comply with the government's mandate. And they own you at this point. Let's read a little bit about this. U.S. Supreme Court on Tuesday turned away a challenge to Maine's Vidco 19 smack scene mandate for healthcare workers, rebuffing for the second time a group of plaintiffs who sought a religious exemption. Justices rejected a request made on behalf of the unnamed plaintiffs, identifying themselves as Maine healthcare workers who objected to the smackcinations on religious grounds. The court in November rejected an emergency request by the same plaintiffs seeking to prevent Maine from enforcing the mandate against them. They were represented by a Christian legal advocacy group. The court previously rejected other challenges to smack scene mandates, including one focusing upon New York's lack of religious exemptions for healthcare workers. So I don't have any faith in the Supreme Court. They're going to do what they're going to do, and largely it's going to be politically motivated in the end. And here's our last story here. I didn't want to have to talk about Russia very much because this whole thing is just ridiculous. I don't want to give this any more attention than I have to. The only reason why I want to talk about it today is to try to help people wake up. Don't sign up with these people. I don't care if the last 3 or 4 people in your family were part of the military and you want to carry on. I hope somebody is watching. I hope somebody is watching. Because Eastern Europe has now become the new Middle East. Guess where all those troops from Afghanistan went when they pulled out? Well, there's about 100,000 American troops in Eastern Europe. And right now, as we speak, they're being repositioned to go head-to-head with the Pew train. Now, this makes me sick to my stomach because it's almost as if nobody's learned their lesson. History keeps repeating itself. People offering themselves up as sacrifices. Now, how is it that they can fool this many people into fighting each other? It just befuddles me. So as we speak, we are now right back into a war economy where war stocks will soon soar and the private sector will suffer, as it always does, as we potentially head into another decades-long conflict. Now, I've heard both sides of this argument, and it sounds to me like it's the Ukraine who's the one that's getting the squeeze. Why do I say that? Well, basically, the U.S. is putting pressure, and the NATO allies are putting pressure on Ukraine to join NATO. I don't know why they're not joining NATO, but I'm glad that they're not. Because what happens when you become a NATO country? Well, the U.S. military-industrial complex grows exponentially, doesn't it? Because when you become a NATO country, you get bases, you get equipment, you get weapons, all of which are manufactured out of America, further increasing the war budget. And the whole thing feels like some big rope-a-dope at this point. Now, I will go as far as to, I don't invest in the stock market, okay? I don't. I used to when I was younger, but I don't. Why? Because you begin to take part in the corruption. By investing this money, you're supporting the very things that you say you don't believe in. Now, there's ways people try to justify that and say, oh, that's not what I'm doing. But at the end of the day, that's exactly what you're doing. And now that we're on a war economy, we've all seen the stock bumps in these defense contractors. I live literally 10 miles away from Sikorsky, who makes these helicopters. They got a big helicopter sitting in the lawn. They got a bridge named after Sikorsky. By the way, Sikorsky was a Russian. Wrap your brain around that. They're flying helicopters all over the place around here. Heck, I just read a story about a helicopter that crashed in Utah at a ski resort. Did you guys see that story? Anyway, what is really happening here? We've got Russian people making helicopters that we use to fight against Russia. I mean, this is just insanity. And who gets stuck in the middle? It ain't Bo Jivin. It ain't Pew Train. It's the children. It's 17 and 18-year-olds that go and sign up for this crap, whose lives are destroyed, who basically we won't even take care of when they get sick. Pump them up on all these meds to make them feel normal, but they don't feel normal. Many of them end up just doing themselves. When will we stop? If you're listening to this show, please listen to my words. Understand, I have nothing to gain by telling you the truth about this. Nothing whatsoever. But you need to hear this. If one day nobody showed up to sign up for these people and they're BS, excuse the pun, then guess what? We would all be treated to a hot oil death match between Pew Train and Bo Jiven. I don't care if they wear a thong on stage. I would watch that. I would pay to watch that. Now, of course, Bo Jiven would get, he'd be the first to go down. Pew Train would probably breathe on him and he'd just fall over. But, what's really going on here? Make them fight it out. Why are we all giving our blood and sweat? Well, a lot of people will invest in these military contractors. Well, that's about the worst thing you can do, because you're feeding right into it, aren't you? You're feeding right into it. We become the ones financing and funding and profiting off of it, just like all the contractors that are profiting off of it. They're doing the exact same thing, and we're no different if we invest in those companies. We are part of the problem. So, tomorrow I found something really interesting about copper, and I'm really excited about tomorrow's show, because what I found is that copper truly has infected all of our bodily processes. We have become dependent on trace amounts of copper in our body for survival. Copper is in the middle of almost every biological process in the body. If you don't have it, you can die. From metabolism of fat to cell communication and nerve impulses, we're literally hardwired with copper in our bodies. We are human batteries. Now here's where things get interesting, because copper competes with iron in the body. They are at enmity with one another, just like the Bible says. Red iron, blue copper. And if you have too much iron in your body, you won't absorb copper. Now, the parable of the Bible says, the two shall grow together, the wheat and the tares. Well, did you know that tare weeds are very high in copper content, while the wheat is iron-based? And so now we're beginning to see the deeper spiritual meanings of the parable about the wheat and the tares, and why the two have to grow up together, because we're all tainted with and dependent on small trace amounts of copper. You can't pull the copper out without destroying the wheat. So we'll get into all that tomorrow. Crazy times, you guys. Crazy revelations on the daily. So I'm glad that you guys could all be here to talk about all this. We'll be back tomorrow with the show on the copper. Let me see, go into the chat for a little bit. I finished a little bit early today. Red iron, blue copper. Yes, Maryland. The wheat and the tares growing up together, because you can't pull the weeds out yet, because it's inside of us. We've been infected since the beginning of time. You guys, I got an entire study talking about all of the different ways that copper regulates systems in your body. It's crazy. Doesn't take much, but it's all throughout your body. We need both, but you only need trace amounts of copper. We become dependent on it. Look at it like an infection you've become dependent on. It's not supposed to be there, but it's there, and you need it to survive. We'll talk about all the ways you need it to survive tomorrow on tomorrow's show. They've done extensive research on the copper pathways in the body and what it's used for. It's very important in cell communication and in your nervous system. Okay? It's like wiring, just like a house would be wired with copper. It's crazy. Break all that down tomorrow. Now, a lot of this is here's the study here. Copper signaling in the brain and beyond. This is the study we're going to break down. And a lot of it's very technical, so I'm going to try to put it in layman's terms for you guys tomorrow so we don't all get too confused. I do have a medical background, so I'm kind of used to reading studies like this, but I know most of you don't, and so I'm going to try to break it down and make it simple to understand. The takeaway is, though, that trace amounts of copper seem to be in the middle of most of the body's processes. That seems to be the takeaway. And that it's at enmity with iron in your body. The two are at enmity between each other. Just like the very first prophecy in the Bible. I shall put enmity between your seed and thy seed. Talking about the serpent. The serpent will bruise you in the heel, and you will bruise him. You will crush him in the head. That's what the Bible says. And we've seen that enmity play out, the two bloodlines, the blue bloods versus the red bloods, all throughout time until the end of time. All right. Now, someone asked if there's copper in the smack scene. Well, not officially, but, this begs the question. What's really happening with some of these illnesses? What's really happening? Some of these side effects of either copper, having too much copper or not enough in the body, seem to mimic much of some of the effects that we're seeing, which is weird. Makes you wonder, did they come up with something that strips the copper out of your body that is causing, you guys, it even comes down to cancer. Copper even affects cancer. They look at it in this study we're going to read tomorrow, and it can either make a tumor grow or shrink. It's crazy. So it makes you wonder, is copper the key? Yes, Wilson's disease. We're going to talk about that tomorrow, Stephanie. The eye is the window to the soul. And guess what? It's no different for copper toxicity in your body. If you have too much copper in your body, guess where it shows up? In your eyes. You actually get a copper ring around the color of your eye. The window to the soul, the window to health. Wow, crazy. So, Yah shortens the days. No flesh left, or shall be saved. Yes. Bruising the serpent, more in depth prophecy. Yes, the bruising of the serpent, or the crushing of the serpent, is the fact that when Jesus went on the cross, he already defeated the serpent. But the serpent bruises him in the heel, doesn't he? Then that's where the nail went. In through the foot, in the heel. So it's all symbolic as well as real. And so, now the other aspect to this is that the serpent is an Ouroboros. He's eating his tail. He's eating his own heel, isn't he? Because it's recycling of the dust in this fallen world. Every time a generation of life falls into the earth, it's a reminder to God of the sinful world. It dies, decomposes into dust. It's death. The serpent is, to him, is attributed all of the death. And so we are in one giant washing machine, tumbling around. And there's nothing new under the sun. There isn't any new matter being made. It's all recycled matter. And every time it dies because of the sin, it keeps growing and growing and growing. And the cup becomes full. The cup of God's wrath. Right? It becomes full. Because all that sin is piling up. And this is why every new generation is full of more and more sin. Because it's grown out of sin. I've been really wanting to get into gardening and planting. But it seems so overwhelming. It seems complicated to me. Because there's so many moving parts and pieces, aren't there? Well, I remember back in my younger years when I had tried to start gardens. And because I didn't know anything, I'd go into the ground and just dig a hole and stick some seeds in it. And water it and keep watering it and watering it and watering it. Nothing would grow. Well, now I've understood that there are things you have to do to the soil. You have to improve the soil because the way the soil is won't support the germination of that seed. You have to add things to it. You have to add, in some cases, lime. Some cases you have to add you know, some kind of something to loosen the soil, like hay or something. You have to add nutrients and mulch. You have to add all these things. Well, think of the world as one giant bed, soil bed. What do they call it? And imagine that all these living creatures are on it, and they have a life force. When that life force dies because of sin, because of old age or whatever, it goes into the ground. And now imagine that ground is now cursed. The ground is now, it's not worth anything. And in order for that ground to grow anything ever again, it has to be remade, doesn't it? And the Bible talks a lot about a new earth being remade and a new heaven. Why do you think he has to do that? Because the ground has been tainted with death and sin. It has to be burnt up and start over again. Okay? So that's what this is all about. This is why Jesus says, dust your feet off. And he was into foot washing, because that dust is the cursed dust. That's what it spiritually represented. Okay? It's that dust of the serpent. And the serpent is he's spinning around, eating his tail. He just keeps recycling the sin over and over again. Just keeps going in a circle like a recycling symbol. So hopefully that answers your question. That was a good question. We've talked about this in the past, but it's always good to revisit this stuff and keep talking about it, because it's good. Because it helps us understand the Bible much, much better. So, yes, we are made out of dust. But understand that the dust even that you and I are made of is the dust of, other people in death, made out of cursed dust. Okay? This is why it's weird. You see older places who have a lot longer history, they carry some kind of weight, don't they? Even the people in some of these places where these ancient cultures have been established, and you see the people living in those areas, and they seem to carry something with them. It's just weird. And maybe that's what this is about, because they've been recycled so many times out of all of the sin in those particular areas. I don't know if curse is the right word, but, tainted or altered. Let's put it that way. All right. What else do we have here? We are the head and not the tail. Yeah, well, I don't want to conflate the two, because that would be an inaccurate metaphor. The serpent has his own depiction of himself, which is the Ouroboros. He's eating himself. He's stuck in his time loop, right? His curse. This is why you see the time loop is often shown as an Ouroboros. He's stuck in time. That's the dark side version of the first prophecy of the Bible, talking about the bruising of the head and heel. Okay, they're two separate things. Okay, they mean the same thing, but one's the dark side version and one is the holy version, which is Jesus conquering the serpent, right? So that's a much holier version than the serpent being stuck in his time loop and recycling all the dust and the sin in the world and history. The Sin Recycling Center. Yes, Annie. Absolutely. It's done. Yes, Tom. Alpha and the Omega. So, soil amendment. My biggest fear. How do you amend soil? Do you do a raised bed, or do you try to till in the earth? It just sounds so overwhelming. I know some of you are really good at gardening, and this is no big deal to you, but can you think back to when you first started and, your first garden? My biggest fear is, I don't know, maybe I feel sorry for the seeds. Like I feel responsible. I know it's just a plant, but, plants carry life force too. And if you fail at something, it's like you failed the plant in some way. So it can be a little bit intimidating. Anyway. All right. Well, I love each and every one of you, and I'll see you tomorrow with the show on copper. I hope you guys have a great rest of your day. Take care and be safe.